everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about collaboration. We're going to talk about it from a little bit of a different perspective. The idea of the fact that we call it family history, we don't call it personal history. What I'm going to cover today is probably going to be pretty basic for most of you, but I think it's a really good reminder, and hopefully for all of you, it'll just maybe shift your perspective just a little bit about what it truly means to collaborate in the genealogy community. As always, if you're watching this live, I am presenting live today, and so I'll be on chat after the presentation if you have any questions, or if you are watching this on live stream, feel free to leave a comment, or on YouTube, feel free to leave a comment, and I'll respond to those as necessary. So let's dive into our discussion about collaboration. And I'm actually going to start today with a story that many of you are probably familiar with. It's the story of Stone Soup. And I'll just briefly tell it. Basically, it's about a village that was hungry and starving, and nobody had enough to feed themselves or their family. And so they got together as a community and they said, you know, we have this pot of water and we have these rocks and we're going to make some stone soup. And if everybody in the community will just bring what they can contribute, then this is what we'll eat. And what started happening was kind of this miraculous thing is one family brought, a carrot, and another brought a potato, and, they each brought their meager little offering. They ended up with this huge pot of soup that was able to feed everyone, and that was a lot better than what they would have eaten had they eaten on their own. Like I said, brief retelling of that really excellent story, but the moral of the story, of course, is obvious, which is that when we come together, we very often end up with a richer experience than if we try to do things on our own. Now, that said, family history has long been a very solitary pursuit in some ways. Now, in some ways, it's always been collaborative, right? We always tell brand new people coming into family history that the very first thing you should do is talk to your family members, especially those oldest living family members, your parents, your grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins who may be a little older than you, or even if they're your same age. Gather all those perspectives about the family story. Gather all the information that's been passed down. And a lot of us, that's how we started our family history, was following that directive. And so now we've built these family trees, and we sometimes, historically, what would happen is we would write letters, right? I still remember when I was young, my mom writing letters to distant cousins, second and third cousins that still lived back in Arkansas where her family was from. I remember taking a trip when I was 12 or 13 years old, going back to Arkansas to a family reunion and having no clue who most of those people were, but my mom meticulously taking notes as she talked to those people. And so then she would come home and she would write letters to archives and go through microfilm. And again, that's the very solitary pursuit of family history. And sometimes even now in a big world where we're technologically connected to just about anybody we want to be, we still sit in our pajamas in front of our computer screen, in our bare feet, and we tend to make family history this solitary pursuit. But the reality is that it's not. And as technology continues to grow, our opportunities for collaboration and our recognition of how closely we're connected is happening quicker and quicker. Let me just, like I said, give you a perspective on this. So several of you have seen this chart from me before. What it is it's a listing of the number of possible people in each generation of your family, of your ancestry, right? So it doesn't include aunts and uncles or cousins or the whole family story. This is just a chart listing numbers in a pedigree view. So for example, you are the first generation and you are one person, right? And you have 2 parents and 4 grandparents and 8 great-grandparents and 16 great-great-grandparents, and that number doubles with every generation. So by the time you get to the 10th generation, which is your 7 times great-grandparents, there are 512 of them, and if you add all those people up, that's 1,023 people in your tree if you just go back that far. Now, of course, those of you who've been with me for a while know that I've shared this number before. I think I only have about a third of these people identified in my tree, right? I'm really good in the 1st through 5th generation, and then in the 6th generation, I actually lose a couple. I have a great-great-grandfather who I don't know who his parents are, and then, of course, I lose more people and more people and more people as I hit more brick walls as I go back. So I only know about a third of these 1,023 people. But that's still not, in perspective, that's not that many people. When you start thinking about the number of siblings your parents have, and the number of first cousins that you have, and the number of aunts and uncles that your parents have, and the number of first cousins that they have, and the number, right? So every generation you end up with more people than just an ancestry. So this is a chart that I've started for just one of my great-great-great-grandfathers. He was born in 1809, so a little more than 200 years ago, okay? He fathered 18 children. Those 18 children provided him with 96 grandchildren. Those 96 grandchildren provided him with 276 great-grandchildren. And those 276 great-grandchildren provided him with 672 great-great-grandchildren. Now, this generation right here is actually my father's generation, and that means that there are at least 2 more generations after that where that number gets exponentially bigger. Not only that, my great-grandfather is one of the younger of these grandchildren, and that means that there, in some cases, this goes down to the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th generation. I ran a single report in my Family Tree Maker program that tells me that there are now 8,700 descendants of this one man. And that's total. That's if I add up all of these numbers to get down to whoever the last living generation is. And so 8,700 people from one man born 200 years ago is a lot of people compared to, again, this view where I descend from 1,023 people in 10 generations, which is a long time, right? If this is about 200 years ago, then this is about 400 years ago. We're looking at a little more than 400 years, only 1,023 people. Compared to this view, in just 200 years, 8,600 people. So I share that with you because this third great-grandfather of mine is in my tree, and he's my third great-grandfather. And I very strongly identify with him. I've done all this research into his life. I've visited the place in Scotland where he's born. I've even written a book about him. Like, I really strongly identify with this man. But interestingly enough, so do a lot of those other 8,600 descendants. He is theirs too. And sometimes we forget that, I think, when we are involved in family history, that our ancestors are not ours alone. And that's kind of the framework for what I want to share with you today. Like I said, it's really basic information, but I wanted to share that perspective with you so that when I share this other information, it makes sense. One of the things in family history that I struggle with a little bit is I want to help people, but I need them to help me in order for me to help them. So help me help you. And there are some ways that works, or some reasons why that's important. One is that different parts of the family inherit different things from our common ancestors. So for example, that third great-grandfather I just spoke of, there is a woman who lives up in Idaho who is, I think, a fourth cousin, maybe once removed, who actually has the tea set that this great-grandfather's wife brought over from Scotland. So she has an actual artifact and some information or a family story that goes along with that artifact. I would never have discovered that had I not been sharing this story of this ancestor. I was sharing it at a conference once, and this woman came up to me afterwards and she said, my mother has this tea set, and we connected, and she was able to share that information with me. Different people inherit photographs. So in my family, I have a great aunt who never married, and she was the last one at home. She lived with her mother for a long time. And then when her mother passed away, my great-grandmother, she actually cleaned out her house. And so she ended up with all of the photographs. That happens. That story is repeated in families all over the world. And what happens is then you end up with one branch of the family that inherits the photographs or the documents, and 17 other branches of the family that have no clue that stuff exists. And so by connecting with each other, we're able to share different pieces of that family story. Maybe you have a cousin who still lives in the same town where your great-grandparents lived, who can go to the cemetery when you can't afford to take a trip to that location. Or maybe that cousin can go to the local courthouse. So there's lots of ways we can enlist each other to help each other build our family trees and tell this family story. Another interesting thing that happens, I've spoken about a family reunion. We end up with lots of photographs, and sometimes our family members weren't so good about labeling those photographs. And so sometimes we end up with people in our pictures that we're not certain who they are. So I went to a family reunion a couple of weeks ago in New York City, met up with some third and fourth cousins, and we started sharing photographs. And interestingly enough, I had photographs of their parents and grandparents, and they had some photos. And as we looked at those photos, we were able to identify some people in those photos that I hadn't been able to identify because they had more information. They were closer to the people, and so they knew them. And so they would look at this photo and they'd say, oh, well, of course, that's who that is. So sometimes when we start sharing those photos around, we can quickly identify family members because of different people have different knowledge of those people. Again, it seems like a really simple thing, but lots of different ways we can collaborate. The final reason for me, or one of the final reasons for me why collaboration is so important, has to do with DNA. If you haven't yet taken the Ancestry DNA test, I would strongly encourage you to do that. But one of the things that becomes very, very quickly apparent with Ancestry DNA is that when you have a cousin match, you need to be able to have consistent information in your tree so that you can identify where your connections are in your tree. Now, of course, there are always people, I've got several cousin matches who are looking for biological family. So they have no family tree because they don't know who their parents are. I'm always more than willing to help those people. There are some people who are brand new to family history. And so, of course, their tree's not very big. I'm always willing to help those people. Then there are some people who have research and documentation and excellent information, and I love that those people can help me. And so it becomes kind of this give and take experience. Sometimes, I've been doing genealogy a really long time, and my tree's really big, and I find sometimes I'm providing much more information than I'm getting. But I'm okay with that because every once in a while I get that little gem of a photograph or that little piece of information that I was missing that helps me break through that brick wall. Or I get that one person that I connect with who has the time and the financial resources to go looking for a record that I haven't had the time or resources to go look for yet. So these connections that we make allow us to continue to grow our family tree, but to do it with this view that we're all in it together, that we're all family. So let me talk, I'm going to actually use DNA collaboration as my example for why there are a few things that we should always do to help make it easier for each other in order to grow our family tree. One of the things that we struggle with in family history is that when we're looking at somebody else's tree, if they haven't followed some basic standards, it's hard to compare that information. It ends up looking like we're comparing apples and oranges when really we're not. It's just that the information hasn't been entered correctly or in a consistent way. Now, I know the argument that oftentimes comes up is, well, it's my family tree. I can do it however I want. Well, that's true. It is your family tree. But remember, those aren't your ancestors only. Those ancestors belong to all of the 8,600 people or however many descend from them. And so the more help we can give each other, the better. And here's just some ways we can standardize that information so that we make sure that we are helping each other. First of all, always enter women with their maiden names. And if you don't know the woman's maiden name, leave that field blank. Again, you may have a system that works for you, but the second that information is shared with somebody else, unless there's some kind of a key somewhere to your code, we don't know what that is. And so if we all follow genealogical standards, then we know what we're looking at. Let me, like I said, just use DNA as an example of why this is important. This is one of my DNA matches. And I'm looking at her tree here, and she has an Adam Henry Schmidt, and his father is Balthazar Schmidt, and his mother is Anna Schmidt. Now, the question immediately is Anna's maiden name Schmidt, And she married a Schmidt or not? Well, in this case, her father is listed. So I can tell that's not her maiden name, or at least I'm going to assume that that's not her maiden name, right? Her father's name is Nicholas Kersner. Well, so did she enter something incorrectly? There's some confusion here to me. Did she do something wrong? See, when you don't follow standards, it requires additional effort on the part of other people to try to connect those dots with you. Not for you and not you doing it for them, but doing it with you. Now, I could, of course, just send her a quick message and ask her, and that would be great. But how much better if I could just tell very clearly that, Mary Triber's father is George Triber. That makes sense to me. Okay. Well, what it looks like also, another way in which this adds a layer of confusion to my match when I'm trying to research her tree is over here in the surname list. I see she has a Kersner and she has a Kersner Schmidt. And if I scroll down a little bit here, she has a Sol Stelling and she has a Stelling and she has a Sol. And so what it looks like she's done is she's actually put the female's maiden names and married names in the given name field, both. And so then when I click on these, again, it's just a layer of confusion. If she had put in just the maiden name, then they would be grouped together. And then the right people I would be looking at the right people to make those connections, right? If this is the surname that I share with her and I click on this, I'm only getting that one person. And then I have to look on the list to find the other person who I think might be his daughter, right? So that, again, the point is we're trying to help each other grow our family trees. We're trying to connect with each other in a way that allows us to share information and that allows us to collaborate. And anytime we can remove confusion from that process, it's going to be fantastic. So always enter women with their maiden names. And if you don't know their maiden name, leave that field blank. I know there's a million arguments against that, but that's the standard. The next thing is to enter your dates correctly. Now, I've seen dates entered so many different ways. Sometimes people enter it, month, day, comma, year. Sometimes people enter it with the 2-digit day and the 2-digit month and the 2-digit year with slashes or a forward slash in between them. The problem with that is, outside of the United States, most people write the day and the month in reverse. And so is 10/11 October 11th or November 10th? And you don't really know because you don't know who's recording that information. Again, a layer of confusion. Is that date 1889 or 1989 or 1789, right? Again, a layer of confusion. So if we follow the standard, which is to write dates in the 2-digit day, the 3-character month, and the 4-digit year, then we remove that confusion. It helps us make sure that we're clear and make sure that the reports that are run and the searches that are done function correctly, and it helps us more quickly make some of those connections we need to make. The final suggestion here on this, again, I said basic information, right? But sometimes we need the reminder. When you enter locations, make sure you enter them from smallest jurisdiction to largest jurisdiction. So in the United States, in most cases, that's going to be city, county, state. If you would like to add the country on, again, that removes a layer of confusion. There are places in the United States that are named the same as places in England, for example. And so sometimes that little extra USA tacked onto the end or England tacked onto the end helps us to remove some of that confusion. It also ensures that the mapping programs that the technology uses now function correctly. So again, using DNA as an example, one of the features on DNA when you're looking at your matches is a maps and locations feature. So if I come over here, what it does is it actually maps the birth locations of this person's ancestors, so 10 generations of their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, so on. It also does the same for mine, and then it compares the two. So in this case, I'm looking at this map, and anything that is orange is where her ancestors are born. Anything that is blue is where my ancestors are born, and anything that is green is where it overlaps. The problem is, over here on this list, she has entered some of her locations in a non-standard way. So not using the drop-down list where possible, Not in the case of some of these foreign language places, not recording them with the proper diacritics or in that proper language. And so it looks like some of these locations are unique when in fact they may overlap. And so the more accurate that you can be with your locations, again, the more likely she and I are to be able to make some of those connections. So always record your locations, smallest jurisdiction to largest. If you can select it from the drop-down list that's provided in Family Tree Maker or in your online tree, do that. Don't abbreviate states. Make sure you include the county, all of that, because it's going to help the technology help you. And then that in turn will help connect you more quickly and readily to other people who might be researching some of those same families. Okay, in our last couple of minutes together here, I just want to share with you a few final thoughts that will help us all collaborate better together. One is share your tree. I was going to say I don't care if your tree is public or private. I do. I'm a big advocate of public trees. But that said, I do understand why some of you want to keep your tree private. That's fine. But if somebody wants to see your tree, be willing to share that with them. That kind of takes me to my second point, which is if somebody sends you a message, reply to those messages, please. One of the largest complaints that I hear as it relates to private and public trees and researching or reaching out and collaborating with other users is that people don't respond to messages. Some of you may not be aware of where those messages are found. Let me just come up here and come to my homepage. Those messages on Ancestry.com actually show up right here. Here you can see my little envelope with the little number 1. I actually had a new message that just came in this morning. Read and respond to those messages. Even if your response is, I can't get to this right now, or it's going to take me a couple weeks to look at this and respond, that's fine. But reply to those messages where possible. Those of you who are reaching out to send messages, please be kind and recognize that nobody owes you anything. So you can ask to be invited to someone's tree, or you can ask how they think that you might be related. Always, the kinder you are, I think the more generous people are, and the more abrupt you are in your writing, the more people are likely to go on the defensive. Send messages to each other, reach out to each other, be willing to communicate and collaborate. Even if you're working on a specific part of your tree right now and you don't want to focus on other things on your tree, send that message, right? If people send you a message saying, I'm related to you on this, your great-grandfather's side of the family, and I think this might be our connection, you can say, I'm actually focused on this other part of my tree right now. I'll get back to you when I get around to that. In the meantime, here's a link to my tree. You're invited to come take a look and see if you discover anything. I'd love to hear what you find, right? Those are just some of the simple messages that we can send one another. I also mentioned here to leave comments, and that is a feature available on every profile page on Ancestry.com. So when you're looking at anybody's tree, your own included, when you're looking at anybody's tree and you're looking at that person profile, you have the ability to leave a comment. So if you've already messaged the person and they haven't responded, it could be because their tree is no longer online, or because they're no longer online and their tree still is. There's any number of reasons. Here's my great-great-grandfather. Anybody could come on here and could actually leave a comment on this tree. So here's the comment feature. I could add a comment that then could be seen by anybody who comes to view this page. So they can see that somebody has left a comment. You need to be aware, anybody can see those comments, unless the person is living and their information is hidden, of course. You have the power as the tree owner to delete comments that are left on your tree. And you can set up your email alerts under your profile here. You can set up your email alerts so that you're notified anytime anybody makes a comment on your tree. You also can come in here to your tree overview, and you'll see a little number here that tells you how many comments have been made on your tree, and you can review those comments that way as well. So I would encourage you, if you have sent messages to somebody because there's some inaccurate or incomplete information on their tree and they haven't responded, just go to that profile and feel free to leave a comment so that others who see that will have that information available. Sometimes the comment I've even left on somebody's tree is, I have more information about this person. You can view my tree by doing this, and then instructions about how to get to my tree so that they can see that particular connection. Again, what we're doing is we're just trying to connect with one another. We're trying to collaborate. We're trying to make sure that the most accurate information about our ancestors is available to anybody else who comes along. In my family, I think in that one family I discussed earlier, my third great-grandfather, I ran a report at a family tree maker once just to see what the birth dates were of all of his descendants. And in the last 7 years, there has never been a month where there have not been at least 4 children born. So I was looking to see if there had been a child born every single week. There are a few weeks that were skipped in that 5 years, but in some weeks there were 2 or 3 babies born. So 5 years, never been a week where there hasn't been a new child born. And that besides filling me with a lot of joy that there's all this family, it also reminds me on a regular basis that I'm not just creating this legacy for my nieces and nephews, that I'm also putting it out there for any of those new babies who are born, those 5th cousins twice removed, who might come along later and be interested in our common ancestors as well. And so I want to make sure that I leave the best, most accurate record. And one of the ways to do that is to make sure that I reach out to some of those 3rd and 4th and 5th and 8th cousins and collaborate with the information that we've discovered, that I communicate with them when information is inaccurate. I would hope that they would communicate with me when information is inaccurate or incomplete in my tree. And the best way to make those connections is to make sure that we're following genealogical standards so that the technology can more easily connect us with each other. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.